What if I told you the man who felt like the most familiar voice on QVC had a completely different life off camera? What if the host we welcomed into our homes week after week, year after year, was facing personal challenges, silent transitions, and a secret story the network never really told? This is the real story of Dan Hughes, not the one from product demos or QVC show guides. This is the story of where he came from, what shaped him, and what happened after he quietly left the network, without a real goodbye. Because what QVC didn't say, fans are saying loud and clear. Dan Hughes didn't just disappear, he evolved. And today, we're telling the full truth, the story QVC never aired. Let's begin. Dan Hughes was born on October 27, 1961 in Indiana, the Midwest. Quiet, conservative, honest. He grew up surrounded by cornfields, simple values, and the kind of upbringing that doesn't beg for headlines. But it shaped him, and early on, Dan faced something many people never knew. He had a speech problem. In fact, for 5 years, Dan was in a specialized speech program to help him learn how to talk correctly. For a man who'd one day be loved for his voice, this is a powerful part of the story. Imagine being a kid who couldn't speak the way others expected, who struggled just to get words out. And then imagine turning that exact struggle into a superpower later in life. Dan didn't just overcome his speech challenges, he turned them into a lifelong strength. That voice, the calm, confident, trustworthy voice, was built through hard work. Before QVC, Dan worked as a radio DJ. Then he moved to television. He wasn't just handed a microphone on a national network, he built up to it. He hosted local TV programs, polished his on-camera skills, and even spent years doing stand-up comedy. Yes, stand-up. Most QVC fans don't know this, but Dan was a comedian. For 7 years, he told jokes and entertained live crowds. That's where he learned pacing, timing, audience connection, skills that would become his greatest assets on QVC. And then came 1994. That was the year Dan Hughes joined QVC, and everything changed. Dan quickly became a household name, not in the celebrity sense, but in the comforting, everyday sense. He was a presence you could rely on. Whether he was selling cookware, tools, or home decor, Dan made it feel personal. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, but that was the magic. Dan made shopping feel like a friendly conversation, like someone you trusted was helping you make a smart decision. And that trust? It didn't happen overnight. It was earned. Dan hosted several long-running shows, including At Home with Dan, The Great Outdoors, and Trending on Q. But it wasn't the product categories that made people love him. A quick pause. If you want to stay updated on all things QVC, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, like this video and drop a comment below to share your thoughts. And for even more insider content, join our channel membership today. Now, back to the investigation. It was how he made them feel safe, seen, included. There was a time when QVC felt like family. And Dan? He was like a brother, a cousin, a trusted friend. But then, after nearly 33 years, Dan Hughes disappeared from QVC. No final show, no send-off, just gone. In early 2023, Dan posted a quiet Facebook update. He said he was finishing up at QVC. Fans were stunned, confused, hurt. Where was the celebration? Where was the moment to say goodbye? The reality, as it later emerged, was that Dan had been laid off, part of broader restructuring within Qurate Retail Group, QVC's parent company. But QVC never said that publicly. There was no announcement, no appreciation segment, just silence. And for fans who had welcomed Dan into their homes for decades, that silence felt like a betrayal. In interviews afterward, Dan was gracious. He said viewers were more upset than he was. That says a lot about his character. No bitterness, no public drama, just quiet gratitude. But that's not where his story ends. In fact, that's where the next chapter begins. After leaving QVC, Dan didn't retire. He didn't vanish into the background. He reinvented himself. In 2025, Dan Hughes joined Scrub Daddy, the viral sponge brand, as a full-time content creator. His new persona? Scrub Daddy Dan, also called Dr. Dirt. You can now find him on YouTube and social media, sharing cleaning tips, product info and still using that signature voice and warmth that fans loved on QVC, just in a new setting. It's a reminder, endings can also be beginnings, and there's more. Dan also returned to his comedy roots. He began doing stand-up again. He started writing, working on a book. He reconnected with the side of himself that came before QVC. This wasn't a man who lost his job and disappeared. This was a man who knew how to start over. And off-screen, Dan's life was always grounded. He's been married to his wife Kelly since 2001. They have a daughter, though Dan has always chosen to keep her private. And that's another side of him viewers appreciated. He didn't overshare. He kept the line between personal and public clear. His values were shaped early by a father who served in World War II. Dan often talked about the discipline and appreciation for life that came from growing up with a veteran in the house. Even in blog posts, Dan showed a thoughtful, sentimental side. He once wrote about a Christmas gift he received as a kid, just a Hot Wheels car track. But that memory stayed with him forever. That's who Dan is, the kind of person who can make a toy car feel like a life lesson. He also loved animals. Dan shared stories about springtime on the farm, when lambs were born and life felt simple. It wasn't about sales, it was about connection. And that's what made his disappearance from QVC so jarring. Because for fans, Dan Hughes was more than a TV host. He was a constant in a world that's always changing. And QVC let that go quietly. But fans haven't forgotten. Even now, Dan's name shows up in QVC fan groups, on Reddit threads, and in YouTube comments. People still ask, why did Dan leave? Where is he now? Why didn't QVC give him a real goodbye? These aren't just product fans. These are people who felt a bond, and that bond was broken. But Dan didn't let that define him. He used it to grow, to rediscover himself, to write a new chapter. He embraced new audiences, adapted to social media, reclaimed the parts of himself that existed before the QVC spotlight. And most of all, he stayed kind. In an era where exits often come with bitterness or gossip, Dan left with dignity. He didn't bash QVC, he didn't stir controversy, he simply moved forward. And that, in many ways, is the real secret QVC never told. Dan Hughes wasn't just a good host, he was a good man. Someone who overcame a speech disorder to become a beloved voice. Someone who made millions of people feel seen and heard. Someone who didn't need a grand send-off to know his worth. Because legacy isn't measured by airtime. It's measured by how people remember you when you're gone. And the truth is, Dan Hughes hasn't really gone anywhere. His voice may no longer echo through QVC studios, but it still echoes in homes, in memories, in hearts. So what can we learn from Dan's story? Maybe it's that success isn't just about longevity, it's about authenticity. Maybe it's that the best endings aren't dramatic, they're graceful. And maybe it's that when one door closes, another opens, even if it's a scrub daddy-shaped one. Dan Hughes' secret life wasn't scandalous, it wasn't shameful, it was inspiring. It was the story of reinvention, of quiet resilience, of a man who built trust and kept it, even when others didn't. So here's to Dan, to every coffee sip shared during a product demo, to every calming voiceover, to every unscripted laugh that made a customer feel like they mattered. You were more than a host, you were family. And for that, thank you. If you missed Dan Hughes, drop a memory in the comments. What was your favorite product demo? Your favorite moment? Your favorite Danism? And if you're curious about where he's headed next, follow him. Because Scrub Daddy Dan is just getting started. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that go deeper than the screen. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of a familiar voice.